In this lesson, we're going to see how to create loops in Java. Now, what are loops? Loops are essentially programming structures that cause certain parts of the code to repeat over and over and over again. Now, loops are critically important in most applications. So we're going to start off with creating a basic loop. Now, I've created a class here. You can see it's called public class loops. There's one thing you'll notice that's missing, and that is I haven't imported the JOption pane package. The reason for that is I'm not going to be using any dialog boxes in this class. Any output that this program is going to do will appear in the command line at the bottom. So now how do we start making our loop? To make a loop, firstly you start with an integer. We'll call ours counter and we'll set its initial value to 0. Alright, so counter is initialized to 0. We're going to create a while loop. So we're going to say while counter is less than or equal to 10. I'll explain this shortly. Then we're going to do the system.out.println whatever message you want to output. I'm outputting I love Java. Alright. Then in the last line we put in counter plus plus. Okay, so what does this actually do? What do these lines of code do? Obviously line 3, which is that one, sets counter to 0. Okay, then you got the while loop. Now this while loop pretty much will continuously repeat lines 5 and 6 until such a time that counter is greater than 10. So as long as counter is less than or equal to 10, it will continue to repeat these two lines here. How do we know it's these two lines? Because it's these two lines that are between these curly braces which belong to the while loop. So anything between these curly braces will be repeated. So let's see how that's going to work. Counter starts off at 0. It comes here to line 4 and there's a check. Counter less than or equal to 10, true or false? True. Yes. Counter is 0. It is less than or equal to 10. Then do these two lines. So the first line is it will output I love Java, and the second line is counter plus plus. Now this is the increment operator. Plus plus will increment the value of counter. In other words, it will add 1. So by the end of this line, the value of counter is 1. So we go back to the top and we start again and we check, is counter less than or equal to 10? Remember, the value of counter is 1 now. Is 1 less than or equal to 10? Yes. Output I love Java. Increment counter again. Now this time counter becomes 2. And in this way it continues until counter becomes 10. Now in the last loop it checks, is counter less than or equal to 10? Yes, true. So it goes back into the loop. It outputs I love Java one last time. Counter plus plus, counter becomes 11, and then it goes back to the loop. Is counter less than or equal to 10? In other words, is the number 11 less than 10 or equal to 10? No. False. Hence it breaks out of the loop. So that's pretty much what's happening in this program. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to save my code as loops.java. Very good. And I'm going to compile and run it. Alright, they have run my code, and there you have it. It's outputted I love Java that many times. I think that's 11 times, because it started out at 0 and it counted up until 10. So from 0 to 10 is 11. So each time it went through the loop, it outputted I love Java. Now what we're going to do is, to make this more clear, let's output each time the value that's stored in counter rather than the message. So I'll output counter. So in other words, every time it comes to line 5, it's going to output the current value of counter. Okay, save this, compile it. Perfect. Let's run it. Can you see that? When we start off, the value of counter was 0, and then with each iteration of this loop after the first iteration, counter plus plus changed the value of counter to 1. That's why we have a 1. So the program, when they checked, is 1 less than 10 true, and it outputted 1. In the next line, counter became 2, it went back, counter is less than 10 true, output 2. So with each time it's outputting, but it doesn't output 11, because the moment the value of counter becomes 11, it breaks the loop. So the loop is over. Now this statement in the at the top here next to the while is known as the Sentinel statement. It's the one that checks whether the loop will continue or whether the loop will stop. Now inside the curly braces of the while, you can put any number of statements. It doesn't just have to be 1 or 2 statements. You can put any number of statements